And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. The Bible says that the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. Certainly, it should be assumed that the ark rested upon Mount Ararat, as it is not a mountain ridge, but a cone-shaped mountain of volcanic origin. The upper part of which, from 4.5 kilometers above sea level to its peak, is permanently covered with ice. Where did Noah's Ark land? Even the peaks of the mountains were covered by water during the deluge. The ice should have melted, but if the ark had landed below the zone of eternal ice, it would have decayed and perished without a trace. Yet if it had landed on the very peak, it would have been covered with a heavy layer of ice, and would have stayed beyond the reach of people. By God's providence, the ark landed in a mountainous lake at a height of 5 kilometers. Throughout the cold years, the ark is covered by ice and snow and cannot be seen. However, very rarely, during summers of warm years, part of it becomes exposed. The earliest mention of attempts to discover Noah's Ark were made by the pagan priest Veron in 475 BC. He stated that many people in his time, and even before, had reached the peak of Ararat, had seen Noah's Ark, and had brought some piece of it as reliquary. In August of 1916, the Russian aviator Vladimir Roskovitsky, who was exploring the Turkish border, flew over Ararat and saw a frozen lake in the eastern part of the peak covered by snow. The frames of a huge ship were located on the edge of the lake. Part of the ship was covered by ice, but the sides of it were visible and partly damaged. When Roskovitsky informed authorities about the discovery, they tried to find its precise location. Flights over the mountain convinced them of the existence of the object, and they reported it to Moscow and Petrograd. At the instruction of Nikolai II, a state expedition was dispatched to Ararat. Later, a scientific mission was sent out to Ararat, which conducted research, measured and photographed the ark, and took samples. The results were sent to Petrograd. Unfortunately, all these invaluable materials were apparently lost during the Russian Revolution. Today, a piece of wood from the Ark is to be found in the Cathedral Museum at Etchmiadzin. Acquaintance with the history of the Armenian people is incomplete without awareness of its religion, especially since the Armenian Church has been inseparable with its people for centuries and has played a significant role in evolving the national history. The Armenian Apostolic Church recognizes the apostles Saint Thaddeus and Saint Bartholomew, also known as the first enlighteners of Armenia, as its founders. Thus, the apostolic origin of the Armenian Church is an incontestable fact in the history of the Christian Church. Christianity, diligently preached by Armenian bishops for more than 2 centuries, had been steadily penetrating into the souls of the people and its rulers. In 301 AD, this process was accomplished with the first official adoption of Christianity in the world. It was adopted under King Dertad III, who declared Christianity to be the state religion of Armenia. In 302 AD, Gregory I the Illuminator, who was later canonized, was declared the first patriarch and Catholicos of all Armenians. It is presumed that the city of Artashat was situated on the present-day border between Armenia and Turkey. The city was located on the hills, and a prison was situated on one of them. King Dertad III ruthlessly persecuted the first Christians. Gregory the Illuminator was imprisoned here for 13 years in a deep pit which served as a prison. Gregory the Illuminator spent the years in the dungeon full of snakes and scorpions which he fed on the food and water secretly delivered to him by an old woman in prayer. Meantime, King Dertad, who had killed many Christians, had gone mad. His family and courtiers were disturbed. The king's wife had a dream in which she was told to go to the prison of Khorvirab. 13 years had passed since Gregory the Illuminator was thrown into the dungeon, and it was assumed he must have died. But she had the same dream for a second and third time. Gregory was brought out of the pit, and he cured the king. Dertad converted to Christianity and became the first Christian ruler of Armenia. Not only that, he proclaimed Christianity to be the official state religion. The monastery of Khorvirab, which literally means deep pit, was constructed over the dungeon in the 17th century. The actual pit, where Gregory the Illuminator was imprisoned, has survived. Khorvirab has always been and will be a sacred place for Armenians all over the world. The residence of the Supreme Patriarch Catholicos of all Armenians is located in Etchmiadzin, close to Yerevan. This cathedral is the ancient Christian temple of Armenia and one of the first in the entire Christian world. Tradition has it that the foundation stone of the temple was laid by St. Gregor the Illuminator in 301 AD on the exact spot where Jesus Christ appeared to him in a vision, commanding him to erect a church. Crossstones in the courtyard of the cathedral deserve special attention. One of them, carved in 1279, belongs to the All Saviour series. Another one, carved in the 17th century, is from the cemetery of Old Jura. Both are covered with complicated ornaments, images of animals and birds. Here, a contemporary crossstone is located, a monument to Armenians who became victims of the genocide of 1914 to 1916. Three and a half million Armenians lived in Western Armenia before the genocide organized first by Sultan Hamid and then by the Young Turks. The Turk assassins were responsible for the systematic annihilation of about 1.5 million Armenians. Those who miraculously survived fled abroad. Most of them settled in the Lebanon, Syria, France, Egypt, Greece, Iran, North and South America. Everything is bound to be forgotten soon. This was what the Turk assassins were callously counting upon. The genocide had killed, if one might put it so, the very substance of our people, but gave strength to their spirit. One eyewitness of the crime was fully justified in saying later that the Turkish assassins succeeded in killing the substance, but failed to deal with its essence. To get an idea of the mythical phoenix which was said to rise out of its ashes after being consumed by fire, one should look at the Armenian people. And whoever does not believe in the resurrection should visit Armenia. Our fire was always glowing, even when we seemed to have been buried under the ashes. This country of mountain rivers would have most probably died of thirst if the greatest of all rivers, that of history, had not changed its course. It was precisely here in the desert of Sardarabad that in 1918 the remnants of our people, who had somehow managed to escape death during the genocide, worked one of the miracles in the history of Armenia. With every rusty implement they could get hold of, such as spades, axes and hoes, they halted the march of the invading Turkish army and held on to a handful of land in their own native country for a handful of orphans and refugees. The total destruction of Armenia seemed so imminent that Vehib Pasha sent a telegram from Sardarabad to the Turkish rulers, informing them of impending success in erasing the name of Armenia off the map of the world forever. But then, one of the most characteristic features of our history once again made itself apparent. A handful of our people who had survived realized their existence and that of their homeland were at stake and came out in force, mustering their last ounces of strength, and started a patriotic war in the full sense of the word, a life or death struggle. And they proved once more that it was impossible to annihilate this nation, and that a nation could work miracles in any situation, even one which seemed utterly hopeless. Sardarabad. All the bells of the village churches on the Ararat plain tolled day and night, sounding the alarm and calling the Armenian people to the battlefield. And the Armenian people were quick to respond. Men and women, the old and young, kept coming with whatever weapons they could get hold of: rifles, sickles, spades, stones, and sometimes armed solely with their teeth. Most of them knew that they were confronting certain death, and their detachments were thus known as shroud bearers. Before going into a critical battle, Armenian generals and troops used to go to Echmiadzin and kiss the right hand of the Catholicos of all Armenians and ask for his blessings. Contrary to tradition, this time the Catholicos himself came to Sardarabad to tearfully kiss the rough, mud-smeared hands of the Armenian peasant soldiers joining the decisive battle. And then a miracle occurred. The Armenian people, although almost bled dry, halted the march of the Turkish army hordes. Even today, when one looks out of a train window at the last scraps of the stony desert, one can't help wondering if this country really had no water at all. Among the witnesses of the age-old cult of water are the famous Armenian pagan goddess Nar, or Nurin, who is still revered in most Armenian villages. The enormous stone dragons, Vishaps, scattered at the foothills of Mount Aragats, and the castles which were built at the source of rivers to guard the water. One of the Armenian traditional holidays, Vartavar, is associated with water. It is the biggest summer holiday, one of the most important holidays of the Armenian Church, and one of the most popular holidays with the people. It is celebrated on the 98th day after Easter. The holiday is celebrated in honor of the Transfiguration of Christ, which happened on Mount Tabor. The Bible says that Jesus Christ the Savior, accompanied by 3 apostles, Peter, James and John, were ascending Mount Tabor, where the prophets Moses and Elijah appeared to them. While talking to them, Christ was transfigured, and his clothes became as white as snow. However, in spite of its Christian nature, the holiday retains a number of pagan features. After the adoption of Christianity, many pagan customs were preserved during Vartavar, such as decorating oneself with roses, pouring water on one another, releasing pigeons, and so on. Just like many centuries ago, Vartavar is nowadays celebrated with the same feeling of excitement and great fun, and is a unique holiday in terms of gathering together the whole family and kin, as on this day it is customary to visit one's parents and relatives. Lake Sevan, one of the most beautiful and highest lakes in the world. Its ancient name is the Sea of Keram. The lake has its origin in the volcanic activity in the Quaternary Formation of our planet. The area of the water surface of Sevan Major is 972 square kilometers with a maximum depth of 46 meters, and that of Sevan Minor is 284 square kilometers with a maximum depth of 99 meters. Sevan lies at an altitude of 1,897 meters above sea level. Many travel to Armenia just to admire Sevan, to witness sunrise over the peaks of the Keram mountain ridge, to gaze at the many shades of turquoise in its waters, to hear the cries of seagulls amidst mountain ridges, to observe colonies of pink flamingos and pelicans, and to breathe in the pure highland air. At a distance of 3 kilometers from the shore of the desolate and, at that time, northwestern edge of the Sea of Keram, close to the source of the river Hrazdan, a small rocky island with a diameter of barely 500 steps stood alone. the island was uninhabited. Only occasionally would fishermen disembark there, clambering on the rocks, or runaways trying to hide themselves from justice. At the close of the 8th century, a few monks settled there, built a small chapel and several cells. Being situated in an isolated place not far from the trade route, with waters rich in fish, the island had such a favorable location that the community of monks decided to erect a monastery on the island. They started the construction of fortification walls, first making a ledge in the rock and placing large stone blocks on it. The wall encircled the island, and a watchtower with small gates was constructed over the wall. Afterwards, 3 churches, cells, and utility structures were built there. The churches of Sup, Arakelots, and Astvadzadzin have survived to this day. They differ in the nature of the masonry used, with accurate and well-matched ashlars. The life of this monastery is not particularly rich in events, but the most remarkable one relates to the end of the 9th century, when the Armenian king Ashot the Iron lived there for a while. From there he fought a battle with Arabs who had approached the shores of Sevan. The monk community took part in the battle along with the meagre troops of the Armenian king. The Arabs were defeated completely. Arabs, the hordes of Tamerlane, and later Persians often disturbed them and ransacked the shores. Some even reached the monastery. The monk community held the lines repelling the raids, and the monastery survived. However, in time, the walls were destroyed, probably in the 16th to the 17th centuries. With a drop in the water level, the island became a peninsula, and nowadays a theological seminary functions there. Early in the morning and in the evening, liturgical motets sung by the students at the seminary can be heard floating out of the churches, drawing a veil over the smooth surface of Sevan. This lake, one of the peerless wonders of nature, is so high up that at times it is hard to make out whether it is a cloud gliding over the lake or blue waves dancing in the sky. Yachts now skim across the blue waters of Lake Sevan, out of which only recently archaeologists excavated a number of 3,000-year-old Urartian royal chariots. There isn't a single poet who wouldn't praise the unique beauty of Lake Sevan after seeing it just once. Water in Armenia is still precious, and there are now even more valuable kinds of water. Armenia has over 300 mineral springs. Water has been sanctified for centuries. As a result, our people like to build fountains in memory of places and people who are ever dear to them. The spring water in the Stepanavan mountain pass marks the place where Pushkin saw the corpse of Gribayev. It is a beautiful, wise tradition, symbolizing the immortal memory of fallen heroes with the sweet and somewhat sad murmuring of pure spring water. The murmur of such water is dearer than gold in the sweltering heat of Armenia, and anyone who drinks it instinctively blesses both those who dug the spring and those in whose memory it was dug. Heaven was in pain, the earth was in pain, and the purple sea was also in pain, and amidst the sea, labouring to bear, was the crimson reed. Out of the reed pipe ascended smoke, out of the reed pipe ascended flame, and amidst the flames ran a fair-haired youth, with his hair of fire, with his beard of flame, and with both his eyes just as real as suns. This is how one of our folk songs describes the birth of Armenia amidst fire and flames. Whenever the Seljuk warriors wanted to find out the nationality of their prisoners, they ordered them to sit by the fire. They knew that whoever at once started rearranging the burning wood and adding branches to increase the flames was Armenian. Armenians are not idolatrous, but they venerate fire as it symbolizes their homes and hearths, which were always in danger. The adoption of Christianity by Armenia in the year 301 entailed destruction of pagan temples. However, preachers of the new religion did not risk damaging this one standing in the king's residence. The Temple of Garni was built in the second half of the 1st century AD and was dedicated to one of the gods of the Armenian pagan pantheon, perhaps to Mir, god of the sun. The temple survived, and during the following centuries served as a summer house, a kind of pavilion. Chroniclers of those times call it a house of coolness. The temple was constructed of basalt in the type of peripteros, that is a building which is surrounded on all sides by a portico with columns. The blocks on both sides of the entrance staircase are decorated with bas-relief of Atlantes on bended knees with upraised hands. The column capitals are decorated with delicate crocket. The cornices of the temple have ornamental fake water spouts in the form of lion heads and are covered by rich crocket with bas-relief. The perfectly implemented hewing and carving show the high level of skills of the local masters who could handle hard basalt so subtly and successfully. The temple was destroyed by a powerful earthquake which took place on Wednesday the 15th of June 1679. The temple was reconstructed in the 1960s, and today we see it close to its original form. It was situated on the territory of the inaccessible fortress of Garni, which served as a residence for the Armenian kings of the Yervandid, Ardashaside and Arshakid dynasties from the 3rd century BC to the 4th century AD. A part of the army was also garrisoned here. The court bathroom was located next to the residence. Being constructed in the 3rd century, it incorporated around 5 medium-sized rooms: the cloakroom, the bathing room with cold water, the bathing room with warm and hot waters, and the combustion room with a reservoir for water heating. Floors with fragments of colorful stone mosaics survived in some of the rooms. The mosaic of the cloakroom is especially interesting. Its plot is adopted from Greek mythology. Gods of the ocean and the sea are depicted on the light green background of the sea, surrounded by Nereid and fish. The inscriptions in Greek introduce the names of gods and Nereid. The roots of the holiday of Derintes lie in the pagan past. Derintes, holiday of cleansing through fire. During the celebrations, newly married couples jump over bonfires. This holiday was associated with the worship of fire in pagan Armenia and was dedicated to the god Mihr. The essence of the holiday was to ease the approach of spring by heating up the cold, wintry earth with bonfires. In order to communicate Christianity to his nation, Saint Gregory the Illuminator set many of the main dates of the church calendar to coincide with the popular rites of pagan tradition. Derintes today is first of all a holy day. The feast of the presentation of the Lord in the temple. In spiritual literature it is called Diarn Daraj or Diarn Tses or Diarn Andaraj, which means God with you, towards God. It is the feast of the presentation of the Lord in the temple. The word Diarn Daraj stands for meeting. feast of the presentation of the Lord in the temple is on February the 14th. But the night before the feast, Armenians traditionally light candles during an evening church service, carrying the flame out into the darkness, symbolically bringing light into the void, and taking it home to light lamps and bonfires, while a bonfire is also lit in the church courtyard. Different artists have imagined and depicted Jesus Christ differently. In Italy, in the Armenian Church of Genoa, the true portrait of Jesus Christ is kept and displayed. In the 10th century, due to the efforts of Armenian-born Byzantine Emperor Constantine, it was moved from Edessa, a town in Armenia, to Constantinople. In the 14th century, Doge Leonardo Montaldo moved the Holy Face from the capital of Byzantine to Genoa, thus saving it from the danger of Ottoman conquest and, renewing historical justice, granted it to the Armenian Church. Tradition has it that the portrait was painted from the living Christ by a court painter Anania by the order of Armenian king Abgar. We may see a depiction of our Savior Jesus Christ in any church, but not many can boast of seeing a depiction of God. It is not accepted to depict God, and few places in the world can you come across such a depiction. One of these places is Noravank. The entrance to one of the most beautiful churches in Armenia is decorated with an enigmatic depiction, so archaeologists and historians claim, of God. Whereas native soil is a common expression in all countries and in every language, in Armenia it may only be used figuratively. It would be truer to use the expression native stone. Spring usually comes only once a year, but in Armenia it may be seen several times. The mountains have their own spring, and so do the valleys, and what's more, at different times of the year. Armenia is small but varied. In this patch of land, one may find all kinds of climatic zones, alpine meadows, vineyards, forests and subtropical vegetation. When autumn comes to the Ararat Valley, the grapes are succulent and the rosy peaches are ready for picking. Nearer to the foothills of mountains, it is still summer and the wheat is only just beginning to turn gold. Meanwhile, in the alpine meadows, the grass is growing lushly and the poppies are in full bloom. Higher still, the snow is only just beginning to melt, and the snowdrops and violets have just appeared, and the mountain peaks are always adorned with snow. There are places in Armenia which don't even see all the 4 seasons, but only 2 of them, winter and spring. And the wind-blown seeds and fruit stones, which sometimes took root, turned into bushes and trees, but these trees were sickly and bent and grew meagerly. The local peasants built their terraced vineyards on the stony hill slopes, and covered them with a thick layer of soft soil, which they brought from far away. Then they irrigated them, filled with water they had fetched from the deep gorge, and cultivated their amazing orchards and vineyards. This is all they had to do to earn their daily bread from the stone. The English historian and journalist Emil Dillon described the Armenians as being a people ready to sacrifice themselves for the sake of peace, an amazingly optimistic people in situations where anybody else would be in a state of utter despair. The best sons of the Armenian nation, he said, are of the substance of which history creates its heroes and martyrs. This wonderful quality of our native soil was described by Pavstos Puzant, a 4th century Armenian historian, in his renowned story about the Armenian king Arshak and the Persian Shah, Shahpur. The latter lured Arshak to see him in his tent with the aim of uncovering his secret thoughts and intentions. They talked and strolled around the tent, half of which, on the secret advice of Persian wise men, was laid with earth brought from Armenia. On the Persian side, King Arshak spoke quietly and humbly, but as soon as he trod on the soil brought from Armenia, he became proud and independent. But who can say for certain where grapes or wheat grain first originated? But one can say that grains of wheat and grape pips were found during the excavations of the Urartian fortress towns near Yerevan, which were built over 3,000 years ago. What's more, the grape pips were of the same varieties as those cultivated in Armenia today. That means our ancestors sowed wheat and cultivated grapes on this soil thousands of years ago. They too struggled with the stone, and at the same time had to defend their orchards and fields from foreign invaders. They struggled against the stones, cultivated wheat and barley, and astonished many foreigners, including the Greek historian Xenophon in the 5th century BC, with a strange beverage brewed from barley, known to us as beer. They turned the stones into grapes and drank delicious wine, which inspired them to carve grapes and pomegranates, wheat and eagles on the stones. But grapes most of all. It used to be customary to begin the history of our land with Urartu, that is, in about 1000 BC. However, the excavations which have recently taken place in Mezamor, Shengavit and Mohrablur confirm that our history, in fact, began 5,000 years earlier and should be dated from the 6th millennium BC. But it is not the historic date, but the essence and significance of the unearthed ancient monuments that matter most. For example, the ancient metal casting foundry and the hieroglyphics excavated at Mezamor may yet reveal new secrets. They undoubtedly testify to the existence in this land of one of the most ancient civilizations of the world, which began long before the biblical flood. There exist cartographic depictions of various historic epochs of Armenia. The most ancient one is the depiction of Armenia on the Babylonian map of the world, which experts date to the 5th century BC. The cartographic inscription on the clay plate is a circular panorama in the shape of a 7-point star, the center of which displays Babylon, and the rays reveal the 7 mysterious islands. Names of Armenia and Assyria, the powerful states in that epoch, as well as other geographic areas, are marked on the map. Urartu, one of the most powerful and highly developed powers of the ancient world, which covered the territory of Armenia of the past, was founded in the 9th to the 10th century BC and existed until the 6th century BC, when its capital, Tushpa, was totally destroyed. Before the formation of the Urartian state, this territory was inhabited by the ancestors of the Armenian tribes who called their country Nairi. The founder of the Urartu state and its first king was Arame or Aram. His name has been preserved in Armenian pagan legends and tales, and obviously explains why foreign peoples subsequently began calling our people or one of its tribes Aramens or Armens, and the country Arme. The Urartu state was originally formed on the territory around Lake Biaina, now Lake Van in western Armenia, and for this reason the Urartians called their country Biainili. Incidentally, information about the country of Urartu, referred to as Ararat and Alarod, is also to be found in the Bible, which states that the sons of King Sennacherib, or Sennacherib, of Assyria fled to the country of Ararat after killing their father. Later, during the reign of King Menua and Agishti I, the borders of Urartu extended over the present-day Ararat Valley and the shores of Lake Sevan. It was during the reign of Agishti I, at around 738 BC, that the fortress town of Erebuni was built. With the might of the god of Chaldeans, I, Argishti, son of Menua, built this solid fortress town and named it Erebuni, in glory of the country of Biaina and to the terror of her enemies. Archaeological material and traces of 6,000-year-old settlements were discovered in the present territory of Yerevan. The enigmas linked with the origin and formations of any people are complex and shrouded in mist, and this is true especially in the case of the sources of the Armenian people. The first Armenian state was founded after the fall of Urartu in its territory with the same capital of Tushpa or Van. The Armenian tribes consolidated while the Urartu state was still in existence, and by the time Urartu fell, the Armenian people were already able to found an independent state. According to the historian Strabo, all the tribes living in this territory were already speaking the same language, Armenian. For this reason also, the ancient tribes and peoples for a long time called us Armenians, Uraradians, and Armenia, the country of Urartu. The Armenians call their country Hayastan, the country of Armenians. But there is another similar sounding word for it, Karastan, country of stones. Armenia certainly is a country of stones. It is intersected by over 20 mountain ridges and over 900 large and small mountain peaks. About 2/3 of the territory of present-day Armenia is covered by mountains and solid rock. The volcanic lava heaped here over the centuries has created a unique open-air museum of stones. Armenia is a land where one can find every type of building stone: marble, granite, basalt, perlite, tufa and pumice. In every valley and gorge, and on every mountain peak, there is a stone monastery. A khachkar, stone cross, a bridge or a hostel, like a stone stamp reminding us that this soil belongs to us. It was certainly not fortuitous that every enemy in turn first tried to destroy us. What a poor old provincial town Yerevan was. Here is a description by an official of the Tsar of how it looked in 1882. Houses with flat clay roofs, muddy streets and squares surrounded by clay walls. Mud, 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 mud is everywhere. But a few years after that, newborn Yerevan was already making itself heard in its dusty cradle. Its clay walls and flat roofs were being pulled down and replaced everywhere by basalt fountains, marble columns and arches. The walls of the newly erected tufa buildings were being decorated with stone deer and stone roses. Yerevan, which for centuries had been lying in a bowl of mountains, suddenly began to rise up along the sides of the mountains and then spilled out over the next plateau. The stones had begun to speak and sing. Only a few cities in the world have their own special hallmark. Any stranger to Yerevan at once feels he has come to the capital of a country with a unique history and a style of architecture. There have been many cities in Armenia in the course of its history, including legend-shrouded Ani, one of Armenia's ancient capitals, but none has or could have been built within a few decades and as finely as Yerevan. The city of Yerevan, though as old as Babylon and Rome, is dear to us not so much as a forefather or father, but as a son and grandson reared by us. This year we will celebrate the 2790th anniversary of the founding of Yerevan. Yerevan is a very old city indeed. Then there's Armenian architecture. The spirit, character and essence of the Armenian people have perhaps never been expressed in any other field of art in such depth as in architecture. Unfortunately, we have inherited little of our civic architecture. A few semi-ruined buildings in Ani and a few inns and bridges. So when we talk about old Armenian architecture, we mostly have in mind churches, monasteries, fortresses, and the wonderful khachkars. The best proof of this is the church of Kerat, carved in the rocks, which is unattractive to look at, so as not to attract attention, but a marvelous work of art inside. It is not majestic, elegantly proportioned or grandiose, but it is like Armenia itself, which has hidden away its stone beauty and secret essence. The Church of Kerat is famous for its rocky architecture, which effectively competes with buildings above ground. The monastery is located on the slope of an almost complete circle of cliffs, enclosed by nature in all its severity and majesty, which seem to penetrate the clearness of the sky. The figure of a lioness on a high pedestal serves as a guide at the sharp bend in the road, which then unexpectedly opens up a view of the monastery. The date of the foundation of Kerat is uncertain. A cloister named Airevank, or cave monastery, was probably founded in this place in the early years of the 4th century. It received its name due to its location in natural and artificial caves. The later name of the monastery, Kerat, refers to the lance which, according to church tradition, was once kept in the monastery, and which is said to be the very same lance with which the Roman centurion pierced Jesus Christ as he hung on the cross. The triangular head of the spear is kept in a reliquary in the museum of the cathedral in Etchmiadzin. During the 9th and 10th centuries, the church was devastated more than once by Arab invaders, and in 923 AD it was ransacked and burnt. A great number of valuable manuscripts were burned, and wonderful buildings were ruined. The existing ensemble of Kerat belongs to the 12th to 13th centuries. First, the chapel of St. Gregory the Illuminator was constructed not later than 1177. It is situated high above the road at a distance of 100 meters from the entrance to the monastery. Part of it is carved in the cliff. These masterpieces of underground architecture have won well-deserved fame for Kerat. The monasteries of St. Ripsime, St. Gayane and St. Shoragat are situated in Etchmiadzin, close to the cathedral. The monasteries were erected on the spots of the deaths of 3 virgins who suffered severe tortures for preaching Christianity. The monastery of St. Ripsime, the construction of which was completed by Catholicos Gomidas in 618 AD, is cited as an achievement of perfection in church architecture. An inscription in the altar apse reads, "Christ our Lord, bless Gomidas, Catholicos of Armenia, constructor of St. Ripsime." St. Ripsime's relics lie in the underground burial vault below the altar apse. Archaeologists carrying out excavations on the territory of the church assume that an antique temple, similar to the one in Garni, existed on the same spot during the pre-Christian era. Fragments of the building, incredibly like those of Garni, and its location at the eastern gates of the city, bear witness to the existence of the temple. The church of St. Gayane is situated to the south of the cathedral, not far from the lake. According to the church annals, it was erected in 630 AD by the order of Catholicos Jezer on the spot of a 4th century chapel. The 17th century wall inscription on the subject of Christ's birth is preserved over the western entrance. The relics of Saint Gaiane lie in the southern side altar of the church, next to the altar apse. The Church of St. Joagat, erected to the west of the Church of St. Ripsime in 1694. Over a 4th century chapel, is remarkable with its peculiar domed halls. Tradition has it that the site where the church was erected used to be a winery, situated in the suburbs of Varashabad, surrounded with vineyards. Christian nuns who had fled from Rome to escape persecution by the Emperor Diocletian found refuge here. Ripsime, Gaiane were among them. Somewhat away from the highway, at a distance of 5 kilometers from Echmiadzin, one can see the ruins of perhaps the most majestic construction in Armenian church architecture of the early years of the Middle Ages, discovered by archaeologists in the beginning of the last century. Zvartnots. The church of St. Grigor is situated here, otherwise referred to as the Church of Heavenly Angels or Vigil Forces. The chronicles also call it Zvartnots. It was covered with rich relief decor from the foundation to the dome. The palace of the Catholicos stood next to it. The architect of this outstanding construction was the Catholicos Nerses III, named the Constructor. The church was built between 643 to 652 AD. The composition of the equilateral cross harmonically inscribed into a circle lies at the basis of its construction. In the middle of the 10th century, the church was destroyed as a result of damage caused by an earthquake. It has never been restored. It was never restored. The excavations of the hill concealing the church were started in 1901. The architect Toros Toramanyan, who took part in the excavations, managed to draw up a picture of how it would have originally looked with all its decoration. A small round pool with a staircase was located in the center of the church in the floor, serving as a christening font. The walls were richly decorated both inside and outside with diverse crockets. In the 17th century, the territory of historic Armenia was divided between Turkey and Persia, But despite this centuries-old loss of statehood, the Armenians were strong enough to produce such brilliant poets as Nahabet Kuchak and Sayat Nova. Sayat Nova said, "Only for your sake, I'd be better dead. So that, dear, at least you could come and spread some handfuls of soil on my grave, my dear." Sayat Nova was the court minstrel at that time. However, the king became displeased with him and prohibited the disgraced singer from performing in public. Moreover, he ordered him to become a monk. Sayat Nova was named Stepanos, was anointed monk, and became a member of Hakhbat Monastery's community of monks. Hakhbat Monastery is situated in a mountainous area in the very north of Armenia, close to the river Debet. This monastery, founded in the 10th century under Abbas I Bagratuni, is one of the finest medieval monasteries in Armenia. Erected on a high rocky plateau, it gives the impression of a small town enclosed within a fortress wall. Hakhbat Monastery is comprised of a great number of monuments of the 10th to the 13th century, including both church and civilian structures. The main church of Hakhbat Monastery, with a, typical for those times, domical hall, was decorated with frescoes which did not occur in other monasteries. Humanities, theology, painting and miniature art were studied here. The village of Odzun is situated high in the mountains of the Lori region. It has a history going back 6,000 years. Mausoleums from the 4th to the 1st millennium BC were discovered during excavations. In the 1st century, Thomas, one of the 12 disciples, came to Odzun and ordained priests and bishops. The name Odzun came from the Armenian word Otzel, which means to ordain. And Odzun is mentioned in medieval manuscripts. Before leaving for India, Thomas the Apostle buried Christ's swaddling clothes underneath the altar of the Church of the Holy Mother of God. There is a 6th century inscription attesting to this above the southern door of the church. The Church of the Holy Mother of God in Odzun was built in 303 to 313 by King Dertat III and consecrated by St. Gregory the Illuminator. It was destroyed by an earthquake in the 5th century. In the 6th century, about 25 bas-relief sculptures from the old church were used in the construction of the present-day church. Now they embellish the church with their antiquity and beauty and are of great value. The second floor of the sacristy was used as a library. The porch of the church has external arches which surround it on 3 sides, and its beauty and uniqueness make it architecturally priceless. Christ's Annunciation and Christening, the 12 disciples, Abgar, King Dertat III, St. Gregory the Illuminator, the St. Hypsimian Virgins, and others are represented on bas-relief sculptures on this monument from the 4th to the 5th centuries. The monastery of Tatev was founded in the 9th century on the site of an ancient sanctuary. The oldest structure of the monastery complex is the Basilic Church of St. Boris Petros, 895 to 906. In 1285, a vaulted church of St. Grigor was constructed. From 1390 to 1453, the University of Datev functioned in the monastery. Famous scientist theologians taught in the university. An interesting monument, a pendulous pillar gavazan, which warned the monks of approaching enemy troops, is located in the monastery courtyard. The University of Datev was a major source of enlightenment in medieval Armenia. What an astonishingly high level of education for that time, and what an enviable knowledge of the various sciences and philosophical teachings. This helps to explain the seriousness and depth of the outlooks of medieval Armenian historians, philosophers and scientists, and the unusual abundance of translations of old scientific books into Armenian. A legend survives to our times, which says that the mountains, Masis and Arakats, were once loving sisters. One day they had an argument about which of them was taller, more beautiful, and more slender. After a lengthy quarrel, the sisters eventually cursed each other. Since then, nobody's been able to set foot on the peak of Masis, and on the top of Arakats, a lake was born from the tears which she continues to shed all year round. Ampert, the former ancestral fortress castle of the Pahlavuni princes, stands prominently on the southern slope of Mount Arakats facing the Ararat Valley. Many feudal castles like Ampert were erected on the territory of Armenia for protection of its land from Romans and Parthians, and later from Byzantines, Persians, Tatar Mongols, and Turks. Armenian builders were outstanding fortifiers. They constructed their fortresses using natural defenses. Wealthy princes usually built their fortresses high up in the mountains, where the enemy could not reach them. Apart from that, they were well aware of the importance of having control over water resources. This is exactly what the builders of the fortress castle Ampert did. It was erected on an outcrop bounded with precipices of deep gorges. A castle occupied the highest standing point of the fortress. The castle itself rose above a small settlement for servants and residents in the fortress. The mighty, huge, basalt block walls of the fortress surrounded the outcrop on all sides, making it inaccessible. In 1026, by the order of the renowned commander Bahram Pahlavuni, one of the churches considered amongst the most elegant in Armenia was constructed in the fortress. The architect erected the church on a rough cliff. A small bathhouse preserved in the ruins not far from the castle also belongs to this period. Bathhouses in ancient and medieval Armenia were used not only for bathing, but social meeting places where people could rest and chat in a friendly environment. History presented the archaeologists in Ampert bathhouse with another remarkable discovery. When the excavation works progressed below the flagstones of the floor, the grave of a jester who would have entertained the magnificent master of Ampert Castle, Prince Pahlavuni, was discovered. Mount Arakats, which used to be famous only for its picturesque beauty, is now a scientific center. Physicists and specialists of cosmic radiation and astrophysics of many countries, who have never been to Armenia, are well acquainted with the names of the villages Puragan and Ampert, which are connected with many discoveries and bold hypotheses in these spheres. It was here on the slopes of Mount Arakat that the Alekhanian brothers carried out experiments in cosmic radiation, that Victor Hampartsumyan, one of the sons of our people scattered all over the world like a constellation, developed theories of young star clusters and computed the mass ejected from nova stars. But long before Puragan, several observatories already existed in Armenia. One of which is situated not far from the town of Sisian. Here, a prehistoric monument was constructed, composed of over 200 ancient stones on an area of approximately 7 hectares. Karahunj is one of the largest and most ancient observatories in the world, dating at least to the 2nd millennium BC. Huge stones located with amazing precision have special holes which are flat, with smooth surfaces of 4 and 5 centimeters in diameter, with angles directed to different points on the horizon and space, and used for studying stars. Petroglyphs, discovered not far from Karahunj, witness to the fact that primitive men in Armenia possessed certain knowledge of astrology. It has been proposed by astronomic methods that the ancient observatories of Armenia, Europe, and Egypt clearly communicated with one another, and the systematization of the available data revealed analogies existing in their names. Analysis intimates them to be projected and constructed for a certain purpose with application of astronomic knowledge. Karahunj served 3 purposes, namely, as a temple to Ara, the sun, the main god in ancient Armenia, as a large and developed observatory, and as a university. For over 1,600 years, the letters of the Armenian alphabet have defended the national identity of our people, like a regiment of 36 courageous soldiers. Tormented for centuries by wars and disasters, our people would hardly have survived until now unless they had owned, along with the sword, a most powerful weapon, a written language. Over half of the books which have survived are kept at the Mardenataran, the Yerevan depository of ancient manuscripts, and the rest are scattered like our people all over the world. Anyone entering the manuscript hall in the Mardenataran can feel the silence of the centuries of our people's history, a silence that is more eloquent than words. If the manuscripts were suddenly to break the silence, the mysterious halls of the Mardenataran would be filled with the sounds of prayers, shepherds and ploughmen songs, tolling bells, refugees' wails, clashing swords, galloping horsemen, women's shrieks and roaring invaders. They've all grown silent and still, and turned to stone in the old folios. The entire history of our people is concentrated in these halls, starting from the Hyksos invasion of Egypt down to the tragic events of 1915. Every nation and every individual has its own unique and inimitable life story. And each of the manuscripts kept here likewise has a life story of its own. Only one thing joins them with unbreakable threads. Each of them contains a tiny part of the history of the people who wrote them. Each of them has visible or invisible traces of the blood which the Armenians shed fighting for freedom and independence against tyranny and annihilation. All kinds of manuscripts are kept here. The words of 5th century historians and philosophers, Armenian translations of the theoretical works by Aristotle, Plato, and Xenon, astronomical and mathematical works by Anania Shiragatsi, and the Consolation in Fevers by the medieval Armenian physician Mkhitar Heratsi, the Book of Lamentations by Grigor Naregatsi of the 10th century, and the manuscripts of songs by Sayat Nova, just to mention a few. They vary in size and appearance from the 5th century ivory-bound, weighty homilies of Mush down to a minute calendar weighing 19 grams, which can only be read through a magnifying glass. There is most likely no sphere of erudition which is not to be found in the manuscripts of the Madenataran. One finds examples of all religious creeds and heresies, philosophy, history, medicine, mathematics, grammar, poetry and prose, botany, medicine, zoology, astronomy, chemistry, anatomy, geography, geology, music, alchemy, painting and aeronautics. Many of the damaged manuscripts are now being restored, but others were so petrified by the horror that they turned into stone and will never be able to reveal their secrets. Sometimes in the remote past, manuscripts, which had been half burnt, damaged by swords and soaked in water beyond repair, were buried like soldiers killed in action. But nobody dared to bury these sacred relics in the ground, so they were put in vaults like dear relatives. Among such long-suffering manuscripts was the Homilies of Mush, which had a history similar to that of our people. This manuscript was copied in the Armenian town of Mush, in present-day Turkey, by the scribe Vartan Garnetsi. It took him 3 years to copy it, and he completed it in 1204. This vast manuscript weighs 32 kilograms without its binding. About 600 calves were slaughtered for its 607 large parchment pages. The manuscript was saved from the smouldering plundered monastery by 2 starving Armenian women refugees. They took turns in carrying this heavy burden, weighing over 32 kilograms on their backs. After exhausting themselves, they divided it in half and wrapped one half in cloths and buried it in the churchyard of the Armenian Church of Erzurum and carried the second half safely to Echmiadzin. At last, the 2 halves of this long-suffering manuscript, whose history is similar to our people's, were joined in their homeland and now live in peace. The menfolk were also courageous in those hard times. When fleeing from the Turks, they carried away the giant gate of the monastery of Mush, a masterpiece of Armenian wood carving of the 12th century, to eastern Armenia. They literally put it on their shoulders and brought it to Yerevan, where it is now exhibited in the History Museum. Not only were our language and literature powerful weapons of self-defense and self-preservation, but so also was the creation of our alphabet, for as well as literary significance, it pursued a political and diplomatic agenda. When it was threatened by idolatrous Persia, it defended itself with the armor of Christianity, guarding itself from the fire with the cross. When Armenia realized that the sermons given in its churches in foreign languages could endanger the native tongue and existence of the people, it at once created its own alphabet, and written language so as to propagate its own church in its own language and to safeguard its independence. It was Mesrop Mashtots, the son of a peasant named Vartan from the village Hatsik, one of the greatest Armenian scholars and public figures of the 4th to the 5th centuries, who carried out the important mission of creating the Armenian alphabet. After receiving a general education in Armenia, and after traveling across many countries and studying all the old and new languages of his time, he created an alphabet which, incredible though it may seem, has not changed in the course of 16 centuries. The first sentence, translated and written with the letters of our new alphabet, is most characteristic of our people: to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. Mesrop Mashtots is the greatest and most renowned public figure of our history, and that is why his modest tomb in the village of Oshagan is a revered shrine in Armenia. Incidentally, it was Mesrop Mashtots who first translated the Bible into Armenian. His translation is considered the best, and wrote the first Sharagan, or hymn, the first textbooks and scientific essays. He opened the first Armenian schools and became our first teacher and educator. Mesrop Mashtots created the Armenian alphabet in 396 AD. And what are Armenian songs about? They are lullabies, work songs, love, exile and pilgrim songs, humorous songs and elegies. Many songs are, of course, about exile, but even more are about peace. Our people who have suffered in endless wars have always dreamed about peace and freedom and expressed their secret thoughts in songs. Grant the world peace and the people freedom is the refrain in one of the oldest songs still sung, and it is hard to believe that it was not written recently, but in the 5th century. When the spring of Armenian songs abounded in the Armenian mountains, the colors in Armenian miniatures dazzled the eye. theatrical historians of the world know that 2,000 years ago, the Armenian capital city of Ardashad had its own theatre, where plays by both Armenian and Greek playwrights were performed. And that during one of these performances, the head of the executed Roman general Crassus was brought onto the stage. Yes, of that arrogant Crassus who had once crushed the famous rebellion of Spartacus and crucified thousands of rebellious gladiators on both sides of the Appian Way. At that time, Roman legions were fighting in Mesopotamia against the allied forces of the Armenians and Parthians. The Armenian king, Ardavaz II, a dramatist and ardent lover of Hellenic culture and theatre, organized a great feast in his capital town of Ardashad in honor of the Parthian king Vorodes I and his son, in order to strengthen and consolidate the Armeno-Parthian Treaty of Friendship. Ardavaz II gave his sister in marriage to Prince Pakur, son of Vorodes. That day, the theatre of Ardashad staged Euripides' drama, The Bacchae, in which the main role was acted by Jason, the famous Greek tragedian. In keeping with the role, Jason had to appear on the stage with the head of Pentheus, slain by the Bacchae, on his shield, and then recite his famous monologue. As a sign of a lucky game, we are bringing home a deer, just slaughtered in the mountains. When Jason was getting ready to appear on the stage, a messenger of General Suren of the Parthians rushed into the theatre. He brought news of victory from the battlefield near the town of Kara and the decapitated head of Crassus. Clever Jason, seizing Crassus's head from the hands of the messenger, put it on the shield and ran onto the stage. The two allied kings and the audience hailed him with thunderous ovation as he began reciting his monologue. The two allied kings and the audience hailed him with a thunderous ovation as he began reciting his monologue, erasing the boundaries between reality and fiction and giving the latter a new meaning. This performance at Ardashad, referred to as the Armenian Carthage by the Romans, was the first recorded play staged in Armenia. According to Plutarch, it took place on May 7th or 8th, 53 BC. William Saroyan, one of the most prominent writers of the second half of the 1st century, wrote the following in the preface to one of his books. Although I write in English and am an American by birth, I consider myself an Armenian writer. The words I use are English. The environment I describe is America, but the spirit that makes me write is Armenian. Consequently, I am an Armenian writer. What's more, sincerely regretting having been separated from his native language and literature, Saroyan never misses an opportunity to express his approval of the people whose work helped safeguard them.